Welcome to the Resilience Files, a podcast investigating human stories of struggle and triumph in the quest to explore the true nature of well-being and resilience and discover the secret to a resilience that lasts. This is a podcast on parenting and family that you won't want to miss. Jacqui and Julian Bull are a powerful husband and wife duo. Julian is himself a highly accomplished, incredibly wise, and very understated person. I mean, he sent me a 2-line bio, which is pretty unusual. His job title is Chief Commercial Officer at Endava. He's a trustee and advisor to iheart, the charity. But most importantly, he's a husband to Jacqui and father to Phoebe and Aaron. Jacqui herself is a talented, incredibly charismatic, and insightful person. She's an experienced coach, a multi-faith minister, a breathwork and iheart facilitator, as well as founder of Serenity Practice, a nonprofit that helps support people with their mental well-being. Both Jacqui and Julian in this conversation were open, raw, and real. If you think you're going to hear some picture-perfect description of parenting and family life, this ain't it. There are dark and messy moments, mental health challenges, mistakes made, lessons learned, but most of all, two humans who understand that this life is one of grappling, learning, and appreciating. Just like Albert Camus said, no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me, there's something stronger, something better, pushing right back. So welcome, Jacqui and Julian. So thanks for joining me on the Resilience Files. Thank you.
Thank you.
And when I was thinking about what we talk about in this conversation, there were so many directions that I thought we could go in because you're both such accomplished people and there's so many things to talk about. And you've both given so much wisdom and insight and contributed to iheart as an organization, and that's so appreciated. But I was thinking about the way that our paths crossed, and that had to do with parenting. And I was thinking that's obviously something very close to my own heart, and I know it's close to your hearts. So I thought that would be a great conversation, and to speak about resilience in the context of parenting, and also with a focus on a child or children who are struggling with mental health issues or just generally struggling. So that's going to be the direction of the conversation. You guys up for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. By the way, Jacqui and Julian, you have how many children would you like to?
We've got a boy, we've got a 15-year-old boy and a 19-year-old girl. So.
Okay, great. And Phoebe and Aaron, right?
Phoebe and Aaron,
yeah. Okay, great. So before we dive in, I wanted to ask you, I guess the first question is, I think about this quite a lot, and I think maybe most people do, I'm not sure, but I want to ask you about your experience of being parented and how you think that influenced the way that you've parented or maybe started parenting, and maybe that changed along the way. Because I think that there's things that when we parented, there's almost things that we feel we're not going to parent that way. And sometimes we can even swing the pendulum too far another way and then see, wow, we need to bring it back to some kind of, balance. And sometimes we say we're not going to parent that way, but we can't help it. We hear our parents' voices coming out of our. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think when I was parent, sort of throughout my childhood, my mum had a lot of mental health issues. She had 2 or 3 nervous breakdowns. So I think sort of one of the overriding sort of things for me as a child was it was very centered around my mum. And it was my dad supporting my mum, which, is quite right. She needed to be supportive. But as a result, I never felt I had I love my parents. I know my parents love me. We always got on very well, but we didn't have that sort of, I suppose, sort of on reflection, a really deep connection, because there was always something in the back, this thing in the background that was, that was ever present and quite sort of dominant in the family dynamic. So so I think that was, that was a big part of my childhood, and I think as well that how that sort of manifested itself in a way that when I had some struggles, I don't feel I was particularly supported by my parents. Again, for good reason, and I've never held it against them. I've never felt resentment towards them, but I think how it has shaped my parenting style is I can be sometimes somewhat overprotective of the kids, and I think maybe that's me compensating for the childhood that I had and the sort of what I went through and that sort of lack of support I had when I went through it. So that would be a sort of a summary of a period a very long time ago now. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. And one question I have for you about that is, though, you spoke about almost something that is maybe a little bit unhelpful. I've been a little bit protective, but I'm assuming that you've also, a connection with your kids has been something that's very important to you, that you wanted to be there for them and have that connection that you didn't have.
Absolutely. I think, it's made me a lot more conscious of making sure that I support the children and I'm around for them. Not just taking them to hockey or gymnastics or whatever after school activities they're doing, but also around for them sort of emotionally as well. It's made me feel very conscious of being that type of parent. Yeah.
How we could support them.
Yeah. And one last question: did that come easy to you, or was that difficult for you because you hadn't experienced that yourself?
No, it's come. It's come really easy to me, actually. I never felt. It's only on sort of when I get asked questions like this that I think about it. It felt quite natural to me.
Yeah. I love that you say that, because a lot of people feel that if you parented without something, then you're not going to have that later on. But to me, human connection is something so innate and so natural in us that it's not something that we almost have to be taught. It's something that, that we intrinsically feel. And so that's really nice.
That's exactly where I came from. It wasn't a deliberate decision. It was just kind of, that's who I am. That's how I feel towards the kids. Whatever the influences are that shape that, that's who I am. So that's what I'm going to go and do.
I think there's
lovely. How about you, Jax?
Well, I think there's an unconscious kind of. I don't think when we sat down and got married, and that's like 21 years ago now, that we sat down and went, when we parent, and we probably should have done. It's like when we parent, we will do X, Y, and Z. But I think there was just this kind of it's kind of, we've done that automatically. We saw in each other that we could do it in the way that we ended up doing it. But my parenting, the way I was parented was a very, my mum, who is like pure love. She's like a fairy. She just is like so. She's like a walking light, my mother. And so we've always had that in our lives. Unfortunately, that was kind of the other side of that was a very difficult relationship with my dad, who struggled with not only his mental health, but alcoholism and things like that. So there was this kind of quite difficult childhood that we ended up in. And so I vowed for it never to be like that. It was absolutely not going to be like that, because my dad was great when we were small, but once we became children that could answer back, and my dad's from the Caribbean, and he was all about respect. And so it was like very much like we were disrespecting him if we ever challenged him on anything. And so from the get-go, it was very much that we would create a family where the children could challenge us. Not from a disrespectful perspective. There's a line there, but they could challenge us and ask us questions and give us not feedback, but more that it was kind of much more open. And I suppose there was part of it, and I do remember us having a conversation about this, from your parenting style and kind of mine and Julian's when we were parented, we realised that there was that scenario, which is like if you were in a boat and you were being and you had to throw one person out and the whole family's in a boat, right? Julian always said that if it was his mum, dad, and his brother and him, his parents would have phoned them out and left the two of them together, right? Because their relationship came first, right?
Yes.
And we made the decision that when we had children, the children would always come first. And so we changed that as far as like we really wanted to parent from a place where, you know, we given these children life. So how could we make them front and centre in our lives? So
that's beautiful. And just to say, so it sounds like there was also an instability there that you didn't want your children to have. You know, and these things are hard because they're nuanced, because we're also people who have our own struggles and our own work to do on ourselves and our own challenges we come up against when these humans grow that aren't sometimes developing exactly in line with how we'd like them to. And so it's not often this beautiful picture of, yeah, we just give them the love and connection and everything we didn't get. It's often a lot messier than that. And I think part of the resilient family is understanding that I always say there's in the dysfunction is very functional often. You know, it can be messy. A resilient family can be a messy family that's learning and allowing each other to learn and make mistakes. And, you know, so would you say that's been the case, or would you say it's been a kind of perfect family, you know, what people picture when they see, you know, in the movies?
Well, us, no.
No, but I think there's a step back from that, right? I think, like you asked us about, well, for me, from a parenting perspective, I actually, from the way I was parented, I actually now am able to look back and see the gift of that, right? So there's actually like a real kind of like, I think I was able to tap into the resilient part of me, and I think that's what you're sharing as well. Your parents weren't around. Julian's parents weren't around, so he found a way. There was something inside him that he found a way of accessing. My dad was so difficult, and the relationship with my mother and him was so difficult that actually I was over here kind of parenting myself. And actually there's a gift in that, because it really shows you what you're capable of, you know?
Yeah.
And so like the dysfunction showed us our resilience. And then the family that we've created is absolutely not one of perfection. And even in the drive, when we went, been to iheart today, and even in the drive there today, we were talking about the fact that Julian said to me, you do know that you're rescuing. You do know that last night in a conversation you were rescuing. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even notice. Because we call each other, right, on the fact that we are, like, you can't be doing that. She's 19 years old, you know, don't rescue her. And I'm like, oh, didn't even realise. So like, this constant, like, how do we inspire our children to be resilient without rescuing has been the constant challenge of this family.
That's beautiful, and it's a theme that I want to come to and talk about in this podcast. So, but before we go there, I wanted to know if you guys could talk me through your darkest or most challenging moment as parents. Can you describe that for me? We all have them, and would love to hear yours.
Yeah, I think I'd speak for both of us here in terms of the darkest, most challenging moment was when we were round at friends for dinner, and one of Jackie's oldest friends was looking after the kids, and we got a phone call to say that Phoebe had overdosed, and could we get home quickly? She was taken into hospital, and could we meet her at the hospital? So that was probably the most impact for me. That was probably the most impactful moment. And then Phoebe tried to do it another couple of times after that, and ended up in a mental health ward. You know, one of those places where all of the edges are, you know, all the edges are smoothed, everything's plastic, you can't take anything off the walls. It was a completely secure place. The sort of thing you see in movies and never thought you'd ever experience in your entire life. And I think that was probably the darkest and probably the most challenging thing that certainly I've been through as a parent.
It was. I mean, it wasn't just about kind of suicide ideation. It was also about, you know, she was hearing voices, really loud voices, And I remember vividly that there was a picture on the wall in this room, and it was a forest, and I'd gone there the following day. Leaving her there was like one of the most devastating things I've ever had to do. She's going, please don't leave me. I've been tears to my eyes now. Please don't leave me. And I was like, I have to. These people know what they're doing, and they will look after you. And they're like, has she got a dressing gown tie in her dressing gown? Can we remove that, please? Can we remove the shoelaces from her shoes? Because, she's suicidal and she may try and kill herself. And there was this picture on the wall, and I'd gone to see her the following day. And she hated me that day. I mean, she was like, I cannot believe you'd leave me here. Yeah. And she said, I spent the whole night watching a man running through there, shouting at me, telling me how awful I was. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this information. Like this child doesn't even feel like she's part of me anymore. It was like she was possessed with something. So it wasn't just suicide. It was also the voices and the it was psychosis, wasn't it? It was like a level of psychosis that we could not get our heads around. And we've got, this is 4 or 5 years ago now, and we've got that means she was 14. So our son is 10, so Aaron's 10, and you've got to try and parent at home. So, and you've got to try and act as if it's all okay, for this 10-year-old boy who's still at primary school, and his sister has been rushed into hospital and blue lighted into hospital with an ambulance. So.
I think what was interesting as well is when it comes to our son, who we try to protect from it, because I think that's our instinct, to protect him and don't know everything's happening. What was interesting, probably about a couple of years ago now, I can't remember exactly when it was, we had the conversation with Aaron and said, do you realise, this is what happened? And he just turned around and went, no, I know exactly what happened. I know you weren't telling me, but I knew what was going on. And he knew anyway. Yeah. Because they can sense, you sense things, if you're that close to something, you sense things are going on. And that was interesting to me, that our natural instinct was to try and protect him from it. And
he still knew.
I think in hindsight, we probably made it worse by doing that.
One of the worst things we did to Aaron, sorry, because this is a bit of an aside, but it just makes me giggle when I think back, it was awful, was I decided that I had to be completely honest with him, and I wasn't I wasn't thinking, I couldn't think straight. And I decided that Christmas, this happened in September, that Christmas I would tell him that Santa didn't exist. So this poor lad had his sister dealing with all of this stuff and this psychosis and everything else, and then his mum comes along in her infinite wisdom and goes, just so you know. So he was just like, seriously, Mum. So.
You also might want to edit.
Life is bad.
You might want to edit that out, just in case Jacqui inadvertently ruins other children's Christmases if they listen to this.
This is like child cruelty. No, but it's interesting you say that, because I was going to ask you about that period. These periods are so rich in learning. Sometimes it's hard to learn because we're so busy beating ourselves up, and feeling bad about ourselves. There's such a strong umbilical cord between parents and their children. It's something that we teach a lot at iheart, to teach people how they can be okay even when their kids aren't okay. Because otherwise, when your kids are happy, you're happy. And when they're not, you're not. And you're going up and down and there's no stability, which is very destabilizing for a child. And it's giving them a message that I'm not okay when you're not okay, because you're not okay. Instead, the message you want to give is that you're always okay. Fundamentally, you're struggling with something, but you're always okay. But they're reading the signals if you really believe that. But it's hard because that's a difficult thing to do. And so in these instances, we're grappling so much with our own personal pain and judgment on ourselves, etc. But if we can come out of that a little bit, and sometimes it's in hindsight, or we have moments or glimpses, there's so much to learn. And you said, Julian, and I was going to ask you guys, what mistakes do you feel that you made during that time, and what did you learn? Because usually these mistakes are a catalyst. Mistakes are a good thing if we recognize them, because they're a catalyst to learn something. We can't learn if we don't see that we're not quite getting it right. There's no self-correction. So that seemed to be one of them. Even a 10-year-old we can give them context and have a 10-year-old appropriate conversation. Where giving kids context is very settling, because without context, they have to make up something in their own minds, give themselves context. And that's very difficult in a 10-year-old mind. So that's a great one. Are there any other things that you kind of learned, like, often these are accelerated learning times in our lives?
I think for me, I think that, the sort of thing I could have done better, and what I learned from it is the mistake I made is thinking that I could control the situation, and I could make sure that there was never anything in the house that Phoebe could harm herself with, or control. If she had a headache, I'd panic and I'd make sure I gave her the tablets, and that became that became very, I think, claustrophobic for all of us. And what I learned, and the moment that for me it became a lot better, is when I just relinquished the control I was trying to establish. And basically, Phoebe is her own person, and she's going to do what she's going to do. And it doesn't matter what I do; she's going to do what she's going to do. And I have to then sit back and realize as well that, I think the big thing for me is realize as well that whatever she did, I would be okay. And
Wow.
and trying to control the situation. The mistake I made is controlling the situation. Suppose I felt that would make me feel better, because I was therefore the protective father and doing all the right things. In hindsight, that was absolutely the reverse, the opposite of
Yes.
what I was trying to achieve. And as soon as I went, you know what, whatever happens is going to happen, and I'm going to be all right with it, whichever way it goes. Clearly, I had obviously a preference to the way I wanted it to go, but whatever happened, there's nothing I can do about it. We'll get on with it, and we'll deal with it, and we'll all be fine at the end of it. And I think that was, for me, the sort of
That's. I mean,
sorry, go on, carry on.
Carry on, Julian.
No. I think that was the big, I suppose, mistake I made, and the sort of that big learning moment. They were the sort of the two things out of that period, and I think actually helped me in lots of other areas as well. Whereas just realize that you can't control everything, and realize that whatever happens, you're going to be all right. You'll deal with it, and you've got the tools to deal with it. It might not be comfortable, it might not be particularly nice, but you'll absolutely be able to deal with it and handle whatever's thrown at you. I think that was the big learning for me that came out of it.
Okay. I want to come back to you and ask you a question. I just want to maybe flip to Jacqui and see, was it something similar for you, or was it?
I think it was similar, but I think I went about it in, I suppose, I'd say feminine versus masculine ways. Julian became quite practically controlling. And so it was like, the knives, the tablets, all of that kind of stuff. And mine was research the hell out of it and find every emotional kind of like support mechanism for my child. How do I support this child? I must know, because I'm a therapist. I'm a counsellor. So how the hell was this happening to my child? And how could I not control it? Because, I should be on top of this, right? So many shoulds in that. And so, and I suppose that it's the same, that it was just dealt with slightly differently, in that it was the letting go of it. And actually our kind of journey together was the constant reality of, I had to get myself to a place, and it's kind of what Julian was just saying, but my words were slightly different, in that if she wanted to kill herself, there was nothing I could do. And that wasn't my job to make sure she didn't, which sounds so odd. It was my job to be there and support her and put a framework in place so that we try to protect her from that. But this is her life, and so, and she chooses what she does with it. And that was like, that still blows my mind, like that, actually to get to a state where we realize that, like, this is and always will be her life. What we do is give birth to her, but ultimately she makes her choices, right? That was such a big thing for me. And also the realization that that I not only was I okay, but that I had ways of that I sometimes had to take myself out of the house. And I always absolutely know that it wasn't to do with like the walk that made me feel better, but it was more that like there were moments when I just had to be, this just felt like I had to be away from this to kind of get the perspective and to remember that those parts of me were still there. Because it was like, oh my goodness, when you were in this house, once the door was opened, you were in the middle of a, I don't know,
Yeah.
like a storm, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think what's amazing is that in this new parenting product that we're creating at the moment, we're talking about, we've created this little metaphor of a journey, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and spoken about how, an effective guide, which is what we're advocating for a parent. A parent should, our job is to be an effective guide, and our child's the hero of their journey and we their guide. But most times with parents, we want to jump in and play the hero role. Right? We want to help them be the hero, but they're the hero of their journey. They've got to come up in these calls to adventure, and they've got to battle them and make their choices. And we can be the guides on the side and be incredibly supportive. But as soon as we overstep that role, it becomes unhelpful for them and painful for us. I don't think as parents we contemplate the pressure that our children feel when they feel that we can't be okay unless they're okay. And that when they're not okay, we're not okay. It's a tremendous pressure that they then carry. So, I mean, this lesson that you guys both learned, I think is probably the most profound lesson that parents can learn. And I just want to say, I'm sure it didn't mean that you guys were just like, holidaying in the Caribbean and not supporting her. I'm sure you were incredibly supportive, but not, as you're saying, feeling the pressure to control this and thinking that you could keep her, alive because,
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think the thing we learn, especially for me, is as Jack said, my job or our job was just to be there for her, and
Yes,
and
beautiful.
whatever path she decided to take or decided to do, and it's not just at that point; it's just moving on now as well. And I think I think I have, as a result of that, I think I've become a lot more relaxed with both the children in terms of, it's up to them to make their minds up. Don't rescue them. You're right. Don't try and be the hero in their story. Just be around for them and guide them. It's up to them. At the end of it, it's up to them. And I think as well that in my experience, you get a much healthier reaction from your children as well, because they feel more empowered. They the dynamic, the relationship dynamic between us as parents and them as children, as a family, completely changes as well, and feels a lot more. It's just a lot more harmonious.
I think the other thing was just like in the reality of what was going on with Phoebe at the time was like I think you sort of like said be there for her. Like I really learned that listening, like just physically being there, like, and I'm talking about just being able to be in the same room, not pick up my phone and just listen, because some of it I didn't understand, right? This child was actually going through something where she was hearing voices sometimes, if I'm completely honest, scared me. I mean, like, there was some scary stuff going on, right? And I was like, how can I be with this? Well, I have no choice because I have to be with this because that's all I can do. So the only thing I can meet her with is to show her that I love her despite what's going on, not make her wrong, not make the voices wrong, because I found myself in the beginning kind of questioning, is that true? Can you like, none of that's helpful. Like, just how can I be there with this child and love her, even though this doesn't even make any sense to me. So that was like real deeply listening and just being with her. So yeah.
But by the way, I think that's such a underrated thing. It often feels like listening is such a passive thing. But, we make the assumptions that we know our kids. I mean, they were birthed from us, they're a part of us, and we've watched them develop, all the way through to who they are now, these little humans, gone through everything with them. And so we assume, like, we know these people. But the fact is, I think it's what was very humbling for me, and as like you, like an involved parent who felt was a pretty insightful person, I realized it was arrogant of me to think that I could know any other person other than myself, as much as I know myself, because you can never go into the hearts and mind of a person and truly know every thought and every dilemma and everything that's going on within their own psyche. That's something that, like, I'm kind of a religious person. I believe that only God knows that, but even if you're not a God person, you know that only that person is able to know that. And so because of that, because we make that assumption, we do so much less listening, and we're so much less curious with our kids or our spouses, for that matter, or the people we feel we know these people, right? We've defined them, we've labeled them, we've put them in the box, and we know why they like they are, right? And so that to me is why what you're saying, Jackie, about the listening, it eradicates that, it obliterates that. It says, no, like, I don't have a clue. I'm interested in you. Like, tell me what's going on in your heart and mind. And I think that's very healing for a person to be able to have someone just being present and listening. It's a very connecting experience for them, and for you as a parent. So it's just something that I don't do enough. I mean, most of my kids have left home and they're having kids of their own now, but I still feel that it's something parents don't do enough of, including myself.
It's just, I know.
Yeah.
It's just simply as well, I notice sometimes I've got my phone in my hand and like actually it's physically going, I'm putting that down and I'm here because like I'm distracted with something. So just like, how could I be there? So
Yeah. And I also want to say as well, I always say that we don't have to be perfect parents. I've got a 10-year-old and he's the only one at home. And because we're working and more freed up to work, because we don't have 6 little kids running around, often he'll say to me, "You're not listening. You're the worst listener." He often says that to me. And I often say to him, "You're right. Like, I'm not good at listening at the moment. I've got like 17 things on my head, etc. So you're right. But let's find a moment where I can listen.
Yeah.
Let's make a time, etc." But I'm not ashamed to say, no, I'm not a good listener. And for sure, when I've got all my work stuff and I'm terrible at that time. And that's fine too. And it's fine for our kids to hear that. There's no perfection in this. We want to allow them to say all of us as a family are going to be imperfect people. We're going to be our best selves and not our best selves. And all of that is okay. It's all okay.
I think that, and I don't know, I know, just in relation to Aaron in this scenario. So we're really clear. Well, we can be really clear on what happened with kind of Phoebe and how that kind of became our emergency, and that kind of was our primary kind of. We had to hold Phoebe in what she was going.
Yes.
And what we're noticing now as a 15-year-old boy is Aaron is really verbalizing the struggles he had with that time. And we're really noticing how and his resilience, but also his coping mechanism, his defenses, and it's kind of showing us as well about the imperfection of kind of parenting, which is like there wasn't enough space to be able to do it very well with him. We didn't parent him. If we'd have had a choice and we were conscious, we would have parented him very, very differently. But instead, he was kind of dragged alongside his sister because she was our focus, And so noticing now that there's some and the kind of, for us, the beauty and the gift in that, because he's coming to us and he's saying, you know what, I wasn't very happy about this, and we're like, cool, like, thank you for telling us, and like, let's see how we can. So it's like just being with the imperfection that like we didn't get it right. There was no right to get,
Yeah. It's a good lesson. I'm dealing with a family at the moment where it's a very similar situation, but maybe went on longer. I'm not sure. How long did this go on with Phoebe, would you say, the struggle she had?
A year. She was off school for a year.
A year.
I think it was about 18, probably
about 18 months, but she was off school for a year, so she was at home.
And how old was she again?
14 to 15.
Yeah, it's right in that teenage, So, but this family was a little bit longer. That one of them was struggling, was maybe 5 years, and one of the siblings is now an adult. feels he has so much trauma from not being parented and just being expected to get on with life, go to school while all this was happening, and almost pretend it wasn't happening, that you're happy and your friends, and don't talk about it to anyone. So he felt those were the signals he's given. And he can't move on at the moment in his life because he feels so traumatized and, from that period. And one of the things is that these things aren't easy, because it's like this person's, life is at stake, and we weren't expecting this. We weren't trained for this, and we're doing everything we can to keep them afloat and ourselves afloat, and all hands on deck. And in a way, I feel like for parents also, I'm not a big fan of guilt. I had my own big insight about guilt a long time ago, and I always feel like it's such a great lesson for Aaron and for these siblings to learn that, that wasn't perfect. Our parents made mistakes. We'll make mistakes. We can say sorry. We wish we could have done it better, which is in self, I think, very healing and compassionate. But it's okay, because you can learn about that. You can learn something about that. That was supposed to be your story. That was supposed to be your journey. You came to these parents. These were the perfect parents for you. Otherwise, you would have had others. And this was your story and journey. And it's going to do something for Aaron in life. Just like you were saying, your parent, how you were parented and how I was parented, did something for us. It made us have to dig deeper and learn something, etc. Yeah. It's going to do something for him too, which he wouldn't have had without it, And
I'm loving the fact that, he's kind of the same age as Phoebe was now, right? When she was going through all of that. And he's noticed that there was this way of being which was to keep us happy, because he did learn in that he never wanted us to be unhappy, because he saw how awful it was for us, right? And so he very much, from an umbilical cord perspective, kind of got to the stage where it was like, they can't be okay, so we can't. Like, he made the decision that he couldn't be okay unless we were okay, because he saw how awful it was. And actually, as a 14, 15-year-old boy now, as a 15-year-old boy now, he's able to see that we are still okay, even if he says to us, I'm upset. I can't believe you did X, Y, and Z. Because we've created an environment now where he can kind of like come with his stuff and say, I wish that was different,
Yeah.
And so he's not attached to that needing to be the outcome anymore, And so I've just watched him finding the parts of him that are able to just express himself and be like completely authentic,
That's great.
Phoebe said something on Sunday that was really insightful. She said one of the things that children don't realise is this is their first time their parents have ever lived life. First time as people, as parents, as people, it's the first time we've ever done it. So why on earth are we going to be perfect at it? We get one chance at it, and and I think so. When you put people, and I think that's for everybody, you put people on a pedestal and expect things to be perfect.
Yeah.
The first time you do anything, it's never perfect. So life's no different. Parenting's no different.
Yeah. Well, why I'm so impressed that she said that is that, two of my married children who've just had their own children, who are still toddlers, are really starting to appreciate what we as parents did, the sleepless nights, the sacrifice of what you want to do because this little kid needs you, all of that. They're starting to, I can see that they're quite appreciative kids, but now it's very real for them what it means. But Phoebe hasn't even entered into that. So for her to have the kind of wisdom to say that is very, very impressive. And I actually wanted to ask you, because I'm sure people who will be listening to this podcast will be saying, well, but what happened with Phoebe? Like, it sounds like she's well now. What did she learn? What changed for her? How did she get well?
Well, it's simple. I think through while I was running around and being practical and making sure that the house was safe and all that kind of stuff, Jacquie went into sort of deep research mode, and that's where we came across iheart, and that's the thing. There was she got a lot of support, but I think when she started talking to you guys and learning from you and your team, I think that was the thing that really that was the thing that got her back to school. That was the thing that gave her the ability to walk into a very scary situation for her and get on with life.
I think at its core, I mean, obviously, it's like she realised she wasn't broken
Yeah.
because she had
Yeah.
convinced herself she was.
Yeah.
And to realise that she wasn't broken, and that and the magnificence of that, she was like in awe of the fact that she was still okay. And so and she knew that it was her behaviours were strategies that weren't okay, like for her, like they weren't helping her. But she found a part of herself that there were just moments, and it took some time. And it took about a year to sort of nurse her, I would say, because I was at home, back to health, back to kind of full health and kind of full acknowledgement of her unbrokenness, I suppose. But there were moments, tiny little moments of light where we might go for a dog walk, and she'd be able to appreciate I know it sounds like the tree or the sun or something that just wasn't in her head, where she decided that she was broken and the world was broken and everything. Like, she was just able to realize that there was more, and she was connected in a way that was just more than who she was.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It's
Sorry, Julian.
Interrupt. It was interesting as well, because there was also a moment, I don't know, a while ago now, where Phoebe was really acting up. She was being a real, just not particularly nice person, and she was just being horrible to us. And there was, the initial reaction is, oh my God, I can't believe you're being like that towards us. And then we both looked at each other and went, we are so pleased that she is, because she's now a normal. She's back to her old self. She's got through this, and she was
shouting. She was shouting us about a curfew that we'd given. She was going out to a party, and we're like going, "Oh, who is this child?" And it was like, "Oh, she's just being a teenager."
We've got a teenager in the house, a proper teenager in the house that we've never had. Yay! So it was a learning moment, but it was also a really lovely moment to show that she was okay. She was
back to herself.
Yeah. She's back to herself. She went back to school. She's got doing really well at school. She's just been out to South Africa, which was a huge thing for Phoebe to do this. But she went out to South Africa, travelled there by herself, and she went to work for a charity and worked in a school for underprivileged children out in one of the townships. And for her to walk into an environment and introduce herself to 50 new people, and then go and live her life there for a while and go and teach and do all of that, I'd never ever imagined her doing anything like that. And she the level of resilience that she has built up in herself, and the ability to just get it done and put herself in that situation is amazing.
But I just want to caveat that with one thing. So in the summer in June, she was to sit her 3 A-levels, and she was only able to sit one of them.
Yeah.
And she had what was like an anxiety response to 2. And it did remind me very much of where we were kind of 4 years ago. And I started to spiral into that. I was like, oh no, here we go, we're going back, right? And I'm just watching like the way I really thought, this is all happening again, I'm not going to be able to cope and all this kind of stuff. And what was so beautiful to witness was the fact that how quickly it moved through her. So it didn't mean that she wasn't able to do her 2 A-levels, right? Yes. And she had the moment of the spiral and the kind of overthinking and the thought storm and everything else. And that then dispersed, and then she found herself again. And that process now happens so much more quickly because of what she knows, rather than before she just gets stuck in it. And that's what's like, you just go, oh my goodness, how could I doubt this child? I've just got to trust that all's okay, So
that's incredible. I mean, there's so much in what you guys said, but I want to draw a few points out of it. I mean, first of all, my experience from when you really feel like you're losing your mind, when you're suffering so much, it knocks your confidence, because you feel like you can't even trust yourself anymore. You feel like you can't trust your own mind. Your mind's let you down. In a way, one of the things that I learned, and took me 29 years to learn this, is that because I used to feel that my mind was just this out of control crazy machine, and I was at the effect of it, like almost like I'd wake up and feel anxious and wake up. One of the things I've learned is that's not the case. It's actually functioning in an incredibly logical, predictable way. It's almost like an equation. There's what goes in and what goes out. And if we're in insecure territory, like you're talking about, what's so common for teenagers is it feels like this pressure with exams. If I do well in exams, that means I'm a worthy person. If I don't do well with exams, it's going to take away my worth. It's going to take away my security. And so the pressure becomes huge. All the mind just revs up trying to think how I'm going to do okay. How can I avoid them? Maybe I don't have to write them. It just starts to panic, right? And kind of coming back to what you said Phoebe found, which is, so the first point is that the mind's always operating in a logical way based on the premise that it's coming from. If it's a premise of what we call attached well-being, attached to these exams and doing well and achievement, then it's just going to go off on kind of insecure thinking. And all, as you said, Jacqui, feelings and behavior are going to be tactics and strategies, around how can I make sure that I get the outcome I want so that I don't, so because there's this threat. But at the same time, what counters that, almost the antidote to that, is understanding that that's not true. It seems true and it's very compelling and probably will be compelling for the rest of our lives. We'll grapple with this. This is our learning, this is where the rubber hits the road with our hero's journey. But there's something that is true outside of that, which is that we have the sense of security. Our deepest part of us, the fabric of our soul, of our psyche, is peace, is security, is love, everything that we're looking for outside of us, the financial security and, and our kids being okay and all of that, that can't give us what we already have inside. It's built in. It's a part of us. And it is the most fundamental part of us. And I love that you say that because that started to become Phoebe's anchor, it sounds. Because usually when you're having such strong thinking and you're feeling it, it almost carries you away. That becomes your core, your anchor. It's almost like that feels like it's, that's what's true. But when you see that, no, that's just my mind, just experiencing life. But there's something that's more fundamental, that's reliable, that's within me. And the moment the human being, and she started to get glimpses of that and started to connect to it. So she knew for herself that was inside of her. It wasn't just people telling her, that kind of North Star. And those glimpses of experiencing her own well-being, she'll never forget. And as you say, they'll be her kind of her North Star and her guiding light when she's struggling. She'll always have that to come back to, and reorient herself. It's like the locus of power shifts from the outside to the inside. And that's, there's nothing more beautiful that our kids can learn, because that's almost, that will guide them throughout life when they come up against these challenges that seem like they can threaten their well-being, their inner security, their sense of self. So that's a beautiful thing. And what would Phoebe say if she was here? Like, what would she say about the way that you've parented her through this?
What would she say?
Would she say you guys have...
I think she'd say we were supportive, but could have done better. I think we were. I think we made lots of mistakes through it. Because it's the first time we'd ever done it, but also it was in sort of particularly tough circumstances as well. And, and also to sort of make matters even worse, while all this was going on, we were living through the middle of a house renovation as well. So, there was lots of, sort of dynamic play in the
compounding factors. Yeah.
I would hope, and that Phoebe would say that we didn't have any huge expectations of her. And what I mean by that, and I think it's one of the things that actually one of the really positive things that came out of my childhood is I was never put under pressure by my family to do a particular thing. They just said, go and find something you're passionate about, that you're happy with, and do that. And that's all they want. And I think that's the other sort of, I think that's the other thing that I've sort of come to terms with as well. Not come to terms with, but understood that whatever Phoebe does, or whatever either of the kids do, they're going to be fine. Whether they drop out of school or, get a first from Oxford, on all the shades of grey in between. Whatever they end up doing in education and whatever career they end up going to do, that doesn't define them, and they're going to be fine whatever they do. And I think for me, that's hopefully what Phoebe would say is we've provided that environment that she's going to be fine doing whatever she does, and we'll support her. I personally, I just want her to go and do something that she's really passionate about, because
Beautiful.
that's when you do your best work, is if you're really passionate about something. And I hopefully that's what she'd say.
I would add to that I think Phoebe would say, and she's written it in cards before, she's so, she always says she's so grateful for the way we parented her. And she's so, she also will say, as you rightly say, we made mistakes. But I think we kind of showed her what love looks like. We showed her what love looks like, what love can look like.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that she has written, and something that that she is really grateful for. Love looks like my mum and dad just being there for me, even and having no expectations, and trusting that I would be okay. So
I've never seen those cards.
That's beautiful.
You sure?
Maybe she doesn't.
To Jacqui.
I'm a better parent than him.
You were the best parent. You were the best parent. Julian made all the mistakes. No, but it's beautiful, because from what I've seen, and I've seen Phoebe. I saw her a while back when we were at a mutual wedding. You were the minister, Jacqui. It was very, very special in the woods. She looks like she's just grown into such a beautiful young woman, and with maturity, and as Julian testified to earlier, with a wisdom, and a person who's in their wisdom can be grateful and appreciate, as I said, the bigger picture, the wholeness of that. They don't zone in on the specifics and details. You see a bigger picture than that. You have more perspective. It's something that comes with wisdom, with when we're in our well-being. So it sounds like, I think it sounds like Phoebe was very, very lucky. So the question that I have for you is that when our kids struggle, oftentimes this can affect the relationship. It doesn't always have to, but a lot of times you see it does when a child's struggling. How was your relationship during this time? And would you say that, because a big question, and I don't like to leave this out, which is why I'm bringing it in now, is that the relationship between parents or partners, I think, is pivotal to and again, not a perfect relationship, because part of a relationship is conflict and working things through, etc. And sometimes relationship struggles more than others. But having a consciousness or awareness that it doesn't matter, that if you're sitting there hating on each other, etc., it does have an effect on our kids. It doesn't happen within a week. The family structure is not taking place within a vacuum. So how did you guys navigate your relationship during such a difficult time?
I think it was it was a challenge, and I think to be honest with you, we were in survival mode.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any. I don't remember many times that we sat down and had a decision how we were going to consciously parent. We made some of the big decisions together around sort of her treatment and medication, and whether she needed to go into this hospital and things like that. But again, they were very those were those very practical decisions we had to make. I feel that the rest of it was just purely in survival mode, and I think that was and as a result, it was stressful. I think it was stressful on us as individuals and us as a couple, and also us as a family. I think that's the other.
It wasn't. It was stressful, and I think we actually nearly broke at that point. We the word divorce came up at that point. We were at the end of our tether with how we were going to parent this, and there was a lot of blame, as far as I blamed him, and I don't know if you blame me, but there was like, you've caused this, or because you just couldn't believe that this had happened in our family. And I actually think that the making of us was Julian's mum dying. So beautiful Wendy died, and there was something so beautiful about the essence of all kind of just the whole kind of the way you cared for her, the kind of deep trust of life that we had, the way we all came together with this death that was happening. That kind of took away from what was going on, kind of like it's his fault or it's your fault or it's like all of that, and just like had this beautiful focus on how do we nurse this woman to death. And we took that really seriously.
Which included Phoebe as well. And
Like
Aaron,
Phoebe and Aaron were really
yeah.
part of that. And I remember, like when she actually died, we all went and we stood with her body, and it was just the four of us in a room, and it was so beautiful. And something emerged out of that just allowed us to be able to communicate in a way where love was very much present again. So we had so we had this kind of like lots of blame, lots of like it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. We can't do this together because look what you created. You know that child, and the reason it's like that is because of you. To a situation that just showed us that life in its essence is about kindness. You know, all of the things that live inside us, and that we and I think as well realizing that they were still inside him, even though I was blaming him so much. You know, so it was his fault that our child, this was happening to our child, was a lot what was going on for me. And then watching him and the essence of him, his kind, loving heart, be able to nurse his mother was like it brought me back to the essence of what we're here for, you know, and the whole family was able to be in that.
I agree. And I think for me as well, personally, it got to a point where there was just something that flipped, and Jackie even sort of made a point of it, that a switch flipped for me, where I went from being angry and really stressed to this is not getting me anywhere at all. This is of no value whatsoever to anybody. It's actually making the world a worse place. And almost overnight, didn't I? I just went, I'm not doing that anymore. That's ridiculous. And I'm fine, I'm good, I'm calm. And the way to approach this is through calmness and understanding rather than getting wound up. And it was almost overnight that it happened. And
I was your mother as well.
Yeah, and I think
I'm just going to get the plug.
All of those things happening.
Sorry.
Just made the whole situation a lot calmer and as Jack said, we came together as a family again.
Very much.
Yeah. Look, what I love about you guys is that you're so real and you're so honest. And I think what's difficult for most families is that you kind of operate within this vacuum of your own little family unit, and you assume that the dysfunction that you experience and the challenges in dynamics are only happening in your family. Or in other families, they might have a bit of that, but not like ours, right? It's not that people are blaming and hating on each other and etc. and, shouting at each other, and that shouldn't happen. Like that doesn't happen in normal families. There's something wrong with our family. And people can start to feel quite despondent, like they failed and this isn't working, and this is our life's project, and it's not working. And I think what is so nice is that often when we go into conversations like this, people share the shiny parts or the nice parts, and they don't share a little bit of the ugly parts that happen in every single family. They do. And if they don't, it's often because they push down, and that in itself is more problematic. I always say that when people are allowed to be themselves and struggle and judge, and, that's all what in iheart we say that's signposts that we off track, and we all off track a lot of the time as human beings, and so if we can't live off track as human beings freely with each other in this kind of family unit, then where can we, And so I think that, and then to show that there are moments where you have like a healing. It almost sounds like you guys as a family had some kind of healing that was brought together through this experience and the shift that occurred. And then the family becomes something else that, like, it's constantly evolving. People are evolving within the family unit, and the family evolves. And all of it is this kind of learning and just really thank you for being so honest about that, because I think that it's going to be extremely helpful to a lot of parents. So thank you for that. So maybe one more question. Okay, go. Sorry, Julian.
No, go on. I said you're
Before
welcome.
oh. So I wanted to ask you about what you think is the biggest challenge for parents today. I know what I think is the biggest challenge for parents, but I wanted to ask you, and we're living in a time where social media has such a big impact on our kids' lives. There's so many other influences besides the family kind of influence, the values that we want to give our kids, right? They now have these other voices and these other influences. And the kinds of things kids used to struggle with, like someone being mean to them at school, they could come back into the family home and that would be a safe haven. They don't have that anymore. All the stuff and all their insecurities are just like exemplified and exacerbated all the time through this kind of continuous, this continuous virtual, life they're having. What do you think? Like, what are we up against as parents? What's something that you guys have learned in terms of how do we help our children with this kind of the challenge that they're going through? Children growing up now, at the moment.
Do you
Do you want me to go first?
go?
So I think the biggest challenge is social media. I think it creates an unattainable lifestyle that young people try and aspire to, and because it's unattainable, they'll never achieve it. So therefore, they'll be constantly disappointed or in a state of stress. But I think as parents, you can't take them off of social media because it's in our lives. It's there. So it's how do you coexist? And I think one of the things that's really helped us as a family, and I think a lot of this actually came out of, we learnt this in lockdown, was find space just for, in our case, the four of us, whether it be we sit down and have dinner with each other every night. And no phones, no devices. We sit down. Although my son every now and again tries to smuggle a phone into his pocket, it's no devices. And the other big one is, and we're lucky we've got dogs, but you don't need dogs. But we'd go out and take the dogs for a walk, and the four of us would go out. You'd just have a conversation, and you'd also find as well that the kids that they would be hanging back, and you'd hear them laughing and chatting with each other, and I think it's the big challenge we have is social media. The other challenge we have is how do we coexist with social media being an influence in our children's lives. And the way we've dealt with it is, as I say, is to find that space for the four of us just to go for a walk or sit down and have dinner and just have a conversation without any of that sort of background noise going on and that buzz you get from phones constantly pinging and dinging and everything else. That's
There's two more for me. One is I really do think we have a society that teaches our children that they're broken, and I think that I think that parenting kind of is an extension of that. So we will believe our children, if they are not happy, are broken in some way. That's a massive issue, because if you're going to tell, because you're kind of teaching your children that they are lacking something when they're not happy. And so one of the biggest problems that I see is the fact that all of us is not welcome as a child. Right. So the only bit that's welcome as a child is the bit when we're smiling and laughing and playing and enjoy. And actually, if we were able to parent from a place of, all of our child is welcome, and it means nothing about us. It just means that our child is fully welcome in this space. So that's one of the biggest challenges I think children have is, and I think you commented on it earlier, which is how if my child's not okay, I'm not okay. Like getting to the biggest challenges we have is how can I be okay when my child is not okay? Because unless we teach them that it's okay not to be okay, if that makes any sense at all, then we're setting them up for failure, Because the gift in both of our parenting, the way we were parenting experiences, is the fact that they didn't do it perfectly, but we see it as a gift. Right.
Yes.
It's not that they tried their best to keep us happy, because what does that teach?
Yeah.
There's that one. The other one, which is a bit of a nuanced one, is and I suppose it's where we end up with the whole label thing, and that's a whole other conversation, which is there's quite a lot of people kind of presenting right now as what would be neurodivergent, autistic, or kind of ADHD, those kind of labels. And not that I want to rest in them at all, but I just think that there's an emergence of quite a lot of young people who are, if we look at what the traits are of those kind of young people, a lot of them are very highly sensitive. Of course, they're thinking and we all work in the same way, but I think that the world has changed a bit, and it would be lovely if we created a world that welcomed people with those kind of sensitivities in it, because I think that a lot of children and young people are trying to navigate the world with a slightly more sensitive way of being, and the world isn't set up for them. And so, to remind them that they're not broken in a world that makes them feel as if they are, feels really important.
Yeah. Look, you both make such wonderful points and have got so much wisdom. And, this thing about having, and I speak about it as having these laser eyes for our child's health is a game changer, because it means that we are stable when they're not, because they're starting to wobble, and we can just see through that wobble to the health in them. And that's what we parent. I often have parents saying, well, I can't say that to my child, or, because he'll go crazy and because he's angry and he's got anger issues. And I'm like, that's not true. Like, you've got to see, of course you can say that. If to a healthy child, you can say that. If your child's not healthy, you can't. So we start parenting based on kind of the limiting behavior that our children are showing. Everything becomes destabilized. We can't parent freely then, because we're always calibrating, are they going to be happy, or how will they take it, or they're not normal, they're special, and so you can't to him do this, etc. And then we can't do things like you said, Julian, have the confidence to say, guys, social media stuff away, we're going for a walk, and have these family experiences which are so grounding, and they almost hold them when they go off into their little social media worlds, because when they come out of it, they can go for a walk with the dogs in nature and do something that's normal and grounding and have real family values. But a lot of parents will say, well, I can't, my child won't, I can't, and they feel disempowered. But no, your child can, within them, they're normal, they've got common sense. And, and so we've kind of lost our confidence often as parents. It's almost like we feel that our kids are too powerful and the voices around them, and we feel disempowered, and that should never be the case.
Let's be honest as well. I think also it sometimes is a lot easier just to let your child be on the iPad when you're at a restaurant having dinner, because then you don't have to deal with everything. It's all, so let's be honest, and we've done that. We have, there are times we've done it because that is the path of least resistance. And again, that's not always a bad thing, because I think also as well as a parent, you do need some respite from your children sometimes. So, and if you can get that, then it's not the end. I think it's important. To me, I work in technology, and Jacqui and I have these conversations a lot. To me, it's not sort of one-to-one parenting and having conversations or social media and technology. We have to work out, and again, we're the first generation going through this. We have to work out how we coexist with technology, and how we ensure that we as humans and our children as well still know that they're okay, and still know that they can lead a balanced life, even though they're getting a lot of this sort of information coming in, and people showing their so-called perfect lives on social media. As long as we can help them go through that, those two things have to coexist, and the sooner we get ahead of that, I think the sooner we'll move forward as a society. I don't think, unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, so you're saying, Julian, that we need to be normal about it, commonsensical and normal about it. And there's not a perfect answer. But what I like about you guys, and maybe this is just a takeaway, is that you're intentional about your parenting. You said, me and Jacqui talk about it. We talk to each other. We're working it through. There's no clear answers, but we're thinking about it. I think that also our kids like that. I've seen that with my kids. They see that we're thinking about our parenting. Not always, because as you say, sometimes we just want to break from it. We don't want to think about your kids, but we're thoughtful about it. We're thinking, we're considered about it. I think that's a big deal to when kids see their parents actually care enough that we thinking about things. That's also a message in of itself.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much. I could go on forever having this conversation with you, and we might do a part two. I particularly would like to talk to you more, and I'm sure there could be a second part where we could talk more about the social media. I'd love to throw around some thinking and ideas about it, because one of the things, we've got a session that we teach kids called Using Social Media Without It Using You, and it's coming more from the psychological aspect of, when we're in our security, then there's a way that we kind of empowered to use something in a very balanced, efficient, a way that serves us, creative, a little bit of escape, etc., but doesn't start to have this power over us, where we feel that it can kind of, our kind of sense of okayness is coming from it, and we almost slaves to it. And that's when all the addictive type behaviors happen. But I would love to get also other kind of think about practically, because it's been on my mind a lot with the Molly Russell story, and Ian Russell is an ambassador of iHeart and a friend of ours. My kids, and also because my children really don't have social media because they've been brought up in a religious home, it just wasn't something. Even if some of them had smartphones, they just, besides WhatsApp, have never engaged in social media. And they're not on their phones a lot. A lot of them even have Nokia brick phones. And that's obviously made it a lot easier. But they've got a very specific pathway that they're on. But for most kids, that's not the case. And so I haven't probably done the kind of thinking that you guys have done, where it's a very real happening thing, that social media is such a big part of your kids' lives. So maybe that's something that we can come back and have a conversation about. Yeah.
Very happy to.
Okay, but thank you so much. And I'm sure people are going to love listening to this. And thank you for your honesty and your openness, and just for being great friends and great supporters of the work we do. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow or subscribe so that you can stay up to date with our latest episodes.